Hi, I'm Katelynne, and this is my second video if you count the introduction video, and this is my first video if you count general topic. And the topic that I'm planning on discussing right now is submission, and it can be an uncomfortable topic for some people because there's a lot of stigmas regarding situations where submission was abused, or there's a mutual codependency of abuse between a person who is being quote-unquote submissive and dominant. I think it would be best to address this topic initially in a sense that is not romantic outside of that paradigm, and talk about it in terms of just general social dynamics. So when a person is being submissive to another person, it's not intrinsically abusive or even sexual, is that it can just simply be to defer to another person, defer to their authority, defer to what have you, just follow their lead. And there are a couple of benefits in doing so. One can be if the person that is decidedly the dominant party is, say, more intelligent and or more competent. So even in situations where you may feel that you are most likely correct, statistically it is still the best decision to defer to said person, on the default of them generally being correct more often. So not going off of feeling, but rather going off of statistics. Another benefit to this is that it expedites a lot of situations. I don't particularly care for spending a lot of time squabbling or even just deliberating over things that are quite tedious, such as, say, where we're going to eat or what have you. It's nice to have a person who is just kind of the de facto final say person, so that there's not really a lot of combative discussion and things just get straight to the point, because I don't really care about getting my way every single time when there are tedious issues. So just having a chain of command is really beneficial in just avoiding unnecessary conversations that are a waste of time and emotional energy, and they can really tax on a relationship, romantic or non-romantic, to spend too much time in disagreement and squabbling. So it can be really beneficial to have a kind of a system set up where there is a person who more or less has final say. Now, in situations where there is, say, a dominant party and one or more submissive parties, I do think it is imperative for the de facto dominant party to be sensitive and to be a good listener, to be compassionate to the needs of the people who are listening to them. So it is certainly a responsibility. It's not an opportunity for abuse, and when somebody is being abusive of that situation, of course I don't condone it. So I think that it's not something that there should be a general rule, whereas the man is always dominant, or the oldest person is always dominant, or what have you, because there are a decent amount of outlying situations where there are exceptions to the rule as far as who is, generally speaking, more apt to take the dominant role. A good for instance of this is that there are different hierarchies in different social circles. So when people say that it's a myth that there aren't dominants and as far as alphas and betas and all the other personality types, they're part correct. The thing that they're correct on is that most people aren't always just an alpha, aren't always just a beta, aren't always just an omega, etc., etc. Is that usually most people have several social circles, social situations where they place differently on that hierarchy. So, for example, there can be a man who is an omega as far as socially and like friends and so forth, who is a alpha in his family, in his home, but is a beta at work. So it is true that there isn't somebody who's like a set personality as far as those different types. It has more to do with the dynamics within certain hierarchies and certain social circles, and the reasons why this exists is so that there can be a chain of command, so that there can be fluidity. So there certainly isn't a one-size-fits-all rule to any of this, but I will strongly advocate for there being a chain of command, for there being an orderly system, because it's just so beneficial in so many ways. And I know a lot of that will be anecdotal and based off of my preferences, because I don't particularly like to, as I said, waste time squabbling and deliberating over things that I deem to be more or less tedious. So that kind of covers it as far as just generally in social circumstances, but as far as relationships go, I think that it's comforting to put yourself in a position where you kind of establish more or less greater consent by communicating trust. So there's different types of trust that you can give your partner. There's a trust to let them take authority, and then there's a trust in trusting someone to submit. And there are certainly different situations in all relationships where there can be a bit of a switch in this based off of the quote-unquote authority vis-a-vis the intelligence and or expertise of said people, where things can switch along, but having it more or less established as to what you are going to entrust different members of your team to do can make a more competent team. It's kind of a practice like zone defense. So if everyone on a basketball team is trying to make the score, and their directive is to be an individual, to be the individual who makes the individual points. Now, they might not succeed so far. And if you switch it over to a zone defense strategy, where you have certain people who are more or less established to be the ones who are going to attempt to make the scores, the people who are going to be on defense, people who are going to be guarding certain positions and certain players and so on and so forth. It expedites a lot of things. It allows you to develop an expertise in your role in a relationship, and it can command for aces in their places. So it's kind of establishing precedence with communication. And this is kind of the same when it comes to, say, traffic laws, for instance. Traffic laws aren't necessarily always the de facto best, safest thing to do in certain things, such as like different speed limits. Obviously, speed limits, what's going to be appropriate is going to be very much so dependent on your surroundings. And the same with many other laws. But these laws exist for a very important reason that takes greater precedence, and that is communicating with your fellow drivers. You can't talk to all the different people around you. You can't talk to them in their cars. You can't see their faces or expressions and so on and so forth. So, for this lapse in ability to communicate, we have these laws so that we can predict the behavior of other drivers. This is what makes it safe. It's not that you need to stop at this point, or you need to go this exact speed limit, or so on and so forth. It's that pedestrians, cars, so on and so forth around you can predict your behavior because there are a certain subset of rules and a certain chain of command and precedence when it comes to traffic laws and regulation, who goes when, so on and so forth. that we can better trust each other, and that we can move more efficiently. And that is the purpose of a relationship, wherein there is established dominant role and submissive role. And it's not to say that that submissive person doesn't have their concerns heard and doesn't have their wants, their needs, so on and so forth, validated. It's just a functionality as far as what order things go into, so that you can move the most effectively, so that you can be the most effective team. It's not to be degrading. It's not to say that the submissive party is maybe less competent or less intelligent or less correct even. Is just to be efficient in a much more broad sense by having a certain setup for things. So I hope that clarified as to what ways that submission isn't necessarily degradation, because I know that some people are apprehensive and they do find it degrading because they've heard a lot of situations where it is abusive, and I'm completely compassionate to them. And if they're apprehensive for entering a dynamic where there is any power exchange, I feel them, and I'm sorry, because it's a really hard thing to do, to find a relationship where you don't feel the ability to entrust that person to give over power to them, or maybe even to have them give power to you. It's a very frustrating type of relationship, I believe, to attempt. So for people who don't find this palatable, you have my sympathy, not my pity, but my sympathy, because I do know that it's hard work. And I think that's about it as far as what I wanted to cover as far as general submission in dynamics. Thank you for watching the video, and hopefully I will start posting more frequently. Thank you very much.